Welcome into another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Happy Monday. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. Hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl. Hope you enjoyed whatever else it might have been that you partook in over the last couple of days. Maybe you went to a Super Bowl party. Maybe you're somebody who is so caught up with what's going on with Indiana men's basketball and Mike Woodson that you could care less about what's going on with the NFL or the Super Bowl, any of that stuff. I'm sure that's probably a small number of fanatics who just can't get enough of Indiana men's basketball, and that's totally fine. Everybody has their niche. Everybody has their preference of things. And we're going to talk about both things today. And this is actually going to be another solo episode from yours truly. I don't know if that's something you guys prefer or not, but that's just the way things are going to be today. You're going to get me for however long we go, and we're going to hit on primarily two things. One, we're going to talk about the Super Bowl just because that's fresh on the mind, and it is the biggest sporting event in the year, every year, pretty much, in the United States. And really, you could say the world. It's the most watched individual sporting event annually in not just the United States, but in the world. But people who are big soccer fans, myself included, I'm not necessarily somebody who toots the horn that I'm about ready to bring up real quick. But soccer fans love to mention that the World Cup is the most watched sporting event in the world, which that's true. But that's, over the course of an entire month of matches, which is, if you're into that sort of thing, which I do love me some footy, some soccer, then I can, get on that train, that gravy train, if you will. But that's neither here nor there. We're here to do some reactioning to the Super Bowl. And we're also going to do a bit of a I don't know if we call it a deep dive, because it's not like I'm going to be pulling out, a bunch of unique things about different guys, but I am going to do what is my version of a deep dive into some of the more prominent candidates to replace Mike Woodson as the Indiana men's basketball coach when he retires at the end of the season. And so, with that being said, before we dive into everything, if you want to chime in, and I feel like I'm better off saying this now rather than at the end of the show, because I'm sure there's a number of you, more often than not, I would assume, that click off of the video before you get to the end, and that's fine. You don't have to watch the entire video. I'm not judging, and I have no way of knowing which of you watch the entire show and which of you do not. But I'd rather go ahead and get this out of the way now while I've got as many of you as I hopefully do. But if I want to hear from you, whether you're a regular commenter, somebody who's never commented on the show at all, I want to hear from as many of you as I can, as many of you who are willing. I want to know who your top candidate is for or to replace Mike Woodson as the next Indiana head men's basketball coach, and give me a reason why. And if you're somebody who, gets in the comments and you already see a couple of different people submit the same head coach that you like or wanted to submit, maybe try to give me a different reason or something to add on to why you would want that particular head coach. And you don't have to just name one. And again, I always feel like I should say this. You don't have to comment, period. And maybe I shouldn't have to say that because, people can make their own decisions and you guys know that. But I just want to hear from as many of you as I can, because this is, and I feel like we say this every year that this happens, at least. It's the most important head coaching search in the history of the program, right? We said that after Tom Crean. We said that after Archie Miller, yada, yada, yada. And it just kind of sounds like nonsense. But the reason that this one feels like it's a step further is because now Indiana has not been relevant in the sport of college basketball now, and I'm talking nationally relevant. They have not been in that conversation in nearly 10 years. And I'm talking about the 2016 season where Yogi Ferrell's team won the Big Ten title. And I thought that team had as good a shot as any to make a Final Four run, and they didn't. They got held up by North Carolina in the Sweet 16, who ended up losing to Villanova on a buzzer beater in the national championship that season. Could you imagine? Let's just say Indiana and North Carolina switch roles, and that's the way you lose a national title game. Now, to win it, that's, of course, outstanding. Way to have that in your arsenal of things you can look back on. But if you're the victim of a buzzer beater like that, it has to be one of the most hurtful ways to lose any sort of national championship game, I would imagine. But yeah, just wanted to preface everything with that. I want to know who you guys want to be on roaming the sidelines, if you will, for the Indiana Hoosiers next season, and hopefully for the foreseeable future. Hopefully we get a Cignetti-like. And I'm not saying it has to be somebody along those, same lines of, how they got to Bloomington, because that's the Cignetti's path to where he's at right now is honestly very unique. And to find somebody who, fits those types of credentials is probably a lot more difficult than you would imagine. Or maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe those guys are sitting there in the college head coaching fields ready to be picked more readily available than I would imagine. And I don't know if that analogy made sense, but we're rolling with it. All right. But before we get into who I'm going to list, and again, if you watch Friday's episode with Alec, then you've already heard, you've already heard one guy that I'm interested in. But I'm going to go through 5 of who I think are some of the most likely to be interested candidates. And if one of these 5 were to be offered the job, I would assume I'd assume they would take it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm dead wrong, but who knows? Who really knows? But before we get into that, the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs were going for a 3-peat, and they couldn't get it done. They got completely ransacked. They got destroyed, taken out to the woodshed by the Philadelphia Eagles last night. And I don't really think anybody saw it coming. I think a lot of us were hopeful who were tired of the Chiefs kind of ruling the NFL. But in the days leading up to the game, I knew my rooting interest was going to be for the Eagles. But I think deep down, I was just like, there's just no way. Like, the Chiefs just get it done. Anytime you doubt Patrick Mahomes and the juggernaut that is Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, just name any of them. Name any of those guys on the Chiefs. And they just feel like they sound like they're a well-oiled machine when you see what they've done over the last 3 seasons and even before that. It's just, it would have been very surprising to see the result that happened. And that's exactly what we got. And before I continue, let's take another sip of coffee real quick because it's feeling really good in my hands and it's making me want another sip. All right, feeling good. But back to the Super Bowl. And I guess I'll start. I want to go and share what I did. I was 2 for 3 on some Super Bowl betting picks, and I did all straight bets. So thankfully I did that, because if I hadn't, I would have just come up short going 2 for 3 on a parlay. But I got Eagles scoring first. That's a bet that I won. I got Mahomes throwing an interception. That's something I felt pretty good about. Second year in a row that I've taken Mahomes to throw a pick and it come through for me in the Super Bowl. And then I also took Saquon Barkley over 110.5 rushing yards. And he had a good game, but he was by no means the star of the show for the Eagles last night. I think that was Jalen Hurts. And of course, a fun drinking game, if you're somebody who partakes in something like that, last night would have been to take a drink anytime somebody mentions it's Saquon Barkley's birthday, or even Cooper DeJean. Maybe the secret weapon to beating the Chiefs is to just have your birthday on the Super Bowl, because my gosh, they loved mentioning it. Even Tom Rinaldi on the sideline made sure he wished Saquon Barkley a happy birthday whenever he spoke to him before the game. But yeah, overall, really dominating performance for the Eagles. And if you're a Chiefs fan, I mean, I can't even imagine what would have been going through your head last night. And I don't know many Chiefs fans. I feel like most people who, at least in our neck of the woods, since we aren't really near Kansas City, if you're somebody who roots for the Chiefs, you're probably also a Taylor Swift fan. And I don't know what, I mean, I guess unless you're somebody who's, who used to live in Kansas City and you've moved around here or something like that. That's something that is, understandable. But most people who root for the Chiefs are also Swifties. And, one thing I liked about the fact that the Eagles got dominated or dominated the Chiefs, I should say, is the fact that it kind of put to bed all of the stupid rumors, nonsense, conspiracies that, the Chiefs were, everything was scripted for the Chiefs, right? I mean, even the very first pass interference that was called against the Eagles, even though it was kind of weak sauce, like I understand, like it wasn't a super like aggressive penalty, but the receiver grabbed the Chiefs defender's helmet. Like I don't care if it's a weak grab on the helmet or not. That's pass interference, and the amount of people who took to Twitter last night right after that and immediately started going, "Oh my God, the refs just want the Chiefs to win. The referees, oh my gosh, the zebras." I mean, it was somebody, again, I don't like the Chiefs, but like, can we just drop this referee nonsense? Nobody is scripting the NFL. And I wish I had Mitchell Page on here, by the way, to talk about this. It was about a year ago, the same conversation came up, and we were talking about it on our podcast, Out of Touch, which again, new episode released this past week. Find that on Out of Touch Media if you're interested. But somebody had called in asking Mitchell's perspective on whether he thinks the NFL is rigged or, if a certain team is scripted to win, that sort of thing. And he laid out pretty specifically and, diligently on why that would be the stupidest thing for the NFL to do, even if they executed it properly. Like, and why it also just doesn't make any sense. I wish I knew which episode it was. I would point you in that direction of the episode, but it was about a little over a year ago. If I'm not mistaken, just because, of course, people were talking about, Taylor Swift, and the fact that getting her and her, her boo to the Super Bowl would be big for ratings. And of course it would be, but like, it's easy to say something's rigged whenever there's a close game. And I guess I understand, like, they've been in so many close games this year that have just kind of gone their way, but that doesn't matter, right? I mean, at least it shouldn't. But it was just, and then, people shut up pretty quickly, I guess, once the Eagles really took control, and that was good to see. I feel like there was one other, piece of conspiracy that was put to bed last night with all of the referee stuff, or maybe it was the combination of referees and just the NFL scripting everything. I'll tell you what would have seemed very scripted if it had worked out. Whenever the Eagles were, this was kind of on the brink of whenever it was getting out of hand for the Chiefs. So it was like 24-0. I believe that was the halftime score, something along those lines. I threw out on social media that, this is just, and I was just tongue-in-cheek saying this, they're setting things up for Patrick Mahomes to have a Tom Brady-esque comeback, the way that Tom Brady did against the Falcons back in, I don't know what Super Bowl number it was, but they were down 28-3 with, I think, 2 minutes and 15 seconds left in the third quarter, something along those lines. And of course, there was plenty of time left, more than that, than what Tom Brady had to work with. And so I just casually threw out there like, hey, we're just getting ready for the Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady mirrored comeback story. And that would have been absolutely insane. And the people who believe in the conspiracies or the NFL scriptedness would have ran with that so hard. Honestly, it may have even, I may have bought into it at that point, because we're talking about a scenario right now that didn't happen as if it did. So it clearly crossed my mind. I didn't think it was likely, and of course, it ended up not being the case. But yeah, that would have been absolutely insane if Mahomes would have been able to take care of that. But now, I mean, and also props to him for kind of taking ownership and not playing well. And usually Mahomes is a big crybaby when things don't go his way. And I didn't see his full reaction afterward, and I just heard some of his comments after the fact, and he seemed pretty humble about it. And that's just a step backward for somebody who is going to go down as a legend in the NFL one day. And he may have a few more Super Bowl rings left in him. Either that, or maybe this was the beginning of the crumbling of the Chiefs dynasty. And I quite frankly hope that that's the case. I don't wish Mahomes to, start taking steps back in his career or anything like that. I just think it'd be nice to see a season not be about the Chiefs for once. And hopefully somebody already threw out, because of the Super Bowl 60, I think it's Super Bowl 60 next year. Someone threw out the logo, and I don't have it right in front of me to see, but someone had mentioned that the logo colors, they usually can predict, tongue in cheek, who will be the next Super Bowl contenders. I think the colors were those of the Bills and the Bears of all teams. And I'd be for that. I'd be down for little Bears Bills in the Super Bowl. Even if the Bills couldn't pull it out. I mean, go Bears, I guess. I got some friends around here that are Bears fans, and maybe you're a Bears fan, especially just because we're not too far from Chicago. And I know that there's people in the show, or who watch the show, that are like Cubs fans and, that sort of thing. Maybe you're also Bears fans. So with that being said, that's kind of my thoughts on what happened with the Super Bowl. The commercial's not super interesting. Maybe I'll say this too. Maybe last night there was just so much going on at the house that I watched the Super Bowl at, that I just didn't pay attention to the commercials as closely as I normally would have. And then I guess the one I keep thinking of, I guess maybe that kind of shows how either good or bad the commercial it was the Seal commercial, where the seal was singing "Seal," the kiss from a rose or whatever. Yeah, that song. I thought that was kind of funny, and it was kind of a lame commercial, but I just thought it was really funny. And I always think of, this is probably just me, I doubt there's many people out here who think of this whenever they hear that song, but I go back to the TV show Community, whenever Jeff Winger and Dean Pelton are singing karaoke in the mall to that song. And it's probably up there as one of my top 2 or 3 favorite scenes in that entire show. So maybe that's why I'm partial to that commercial from last night. Feel free to let me know which commercials you like too. Let me know which ones I maybe missed out on. I've heard a couple people earlier today talking about there was 2 different mustache commercials, and I remember that. I remember thinking they were both the same commercial, again, because I guess I was only halfway paying attention to what was going on with the commercials. But people said those are funny. Yeah, and that's about. There wasn't too many amusing ones, at least to me. But yeah, we'll move on from the Super Bowl right now. I think that's about all. Oh yeah, the halftime show. I guess I'm not big on Kendrick Lamar. I don't hate him. Don't like him. I mean, I'm not really big in hip hop and rap. I actually used to be as a middle schooler. I feel like everybody goes through a phase in middle school with a certain type of music that really isn't them or for them. If that makes sense. But they end up just growing into something else, whatever it may be. That was rap for me back in middle school. 6th grade, 7th grade me probably would have loved Kendrick Lamar, but I just I know a few songs. I knew a couple that were on his big breakout album that came out, I believe, while I was in high school. And, it was fine. The performance itself was pretty underwhelming, though. I thought Usher's last year was a lot better. I thought the year before that with Rihanna, I believe, too, was a couple years ago. I thought hers was better. Just very, very, of the Super Bowl halftime performances I can remember, very unmemorable. Very unmemorable. But that's just me. Maybe you really dug it. And if you digged it, whatever you want to call it, then cheers, my friend. Yeah, we've spent enough time talking about the Super Bowl. A lot longer than I anticipated, but sometimes I can just get to rambling and just kind of going down into different rabbit holes that I don't anticipate going down. But yeah, that's my Super Bowl thoughts. Let's get into what many of you are probably. There may have even been some of you who just sat through that and were like, "My gosh, can we just get to the Indiana stuff? This is In Touch with Indiana Sports, right?" And it is indeed. It is indeed In Touch with Indiana Sports. And again, we are powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. Go ahead and check out all of the great stuff being written on HoosierIllustrated.com from our man Kyler Staley, Alec Lasley, Dylan Traeger, Drew Rosenberg. What a crew we have. What a crew we have indeed. And they will be covering everything going on with this coaching search that we are about to dive into for the first time. And I'm hoping throughout the rest of the week to have a couple of different guests who can help me kind of dive deeper into maybe what's realistic for the Indiana head coaching search. Who's a candidate that would take it? Who's somebody that's being talked about a lot that shouldn't even be mentioned at all? And while we're on that note, real quick, before I forget, there is one particular name that I'm not even going to mention. And it's the name that gets brought up for every single Indiana men's basketball coaching search. And it's honestly embarrassing at this point as a fan to just think that the person, I feel like I'm talking about Lord Voldemort, he who shall not be named. It's not because this person is evil, but it's because bringing up the person that I'm referencing, I'm sure many of you have caught on to who it is by now, but bringing up this person is just asking for Indiana fans to be embarrassed. I think that's probably all I need to say about it. That's all I need to say about it. The only reason I will mention this particular non-candidate's name is if he legitimately became a favorite. Like there was word that he was interested. If that doesn't happen, we're not talking about said former coach. And that if you haven't figured out who it is by now, maybe that's enough to help jog your memory on a particular human being that Indiana fans used to be over the moon for. So, and I look at this. I'm taking my own bait, and I'm wanting to talk about what we're going to shut the door. We're going to go. So right now we're on the highway, and I've had a few opportunities to exit, and I've got one more opportunity or else I'm stuck. We're going to go ahead and take the exit ramp right now, and we're going to abandon that part of the conversation, and we'll get into a few other things. I don't know if I just heard somebody knocking on my door or not, but I'm going to pause this and see if somebody did or not. All right, we're back. I think that noise might have just been my door moving from the heater turning off and on, something like that. Or maybe there's a ghost in the house. But nonetheless, let's get into start talking about these potential candidates who may be interested in taking the Indiana Hoosiers job after this season concludes. And we're going to start off with somebody who's not necessarily my number one pick, but he's kind of the name that everybody thinks of whenever they initially think of, oh, this guy would be great. He's an Indiana guy. He made a Final Four at a place that should never make a Final Four. Like, he's so great. I mean, I also feel like I'm kind of in rare form today with some of these expressions that I'm doing when bringing up certain situations. But I'm talking about Dusty May. And speaking of which, another reason to talk about him right now, his team just defeated the Hoosiers at Assembly Hall. And I'll say this, I was kind of hoping, I mean, for multiple reasons, but primarily hoping Indiana would win this past weekend so less people would be, kind of excited about Dusty May. And, people could still throw out like, oh, he was thinking about the Indiana job. Like, it doesn't matter if they lost to Indiana this time. He wants that job so bad. And I guess before we kind of go further into his record, his resume, if you will. Let's go and just hear from the guy himself, because he was asked after the game on over the weekend about potentially being interested in becoming the new head coach at Indiana, and here's what he had to say.
Dusty, many of these Indiana fans have made it clear they like you maybe as their next head coach. Would you have any interest in the job?
I mean, first of all, it's flattering when you have the path that I had and have. I'm still on that same path. It's it makes you feel good, because what's your competitive advantage as a student manager that transferred in as a marginal Division II player? And you just think back and it's like, man, you really, all I did was show with great energy and passion for this game and helping people every day. And because of that, I think people always saw something or believed in me. And then you get to this point. But that stuff's crazy. I mean, I love being at Michigan. I love our team. We're fighting like crazy. That's it. I mean, this place is my foundation, but I'm very, very happy at the University of Michigan. Came here to win a game and mission accomplished.
Do you have any message to Michigan fans that might be worried right now?
I mean, there's nothing I can say that's going to make this one way or the other. I love being at Michigan. That hasn't crossed my mind other than just what friends and family said. And to be honest, I've eliminated all that. So.
And there you have it. And there's a few things that are interesting about his response. Like, first of all, he didn't turn it down either time that he was asked about it from the reporter who asked the question. Excuse me. And I think the most intriguing part about all of it is that, somebody asked if Michigan fans should be worried. I think that if he wasn't interested, he would have just said, no, I'm not going to take this job. Like, he clearly, I don't want to say he wasn't prepared with better answers. Of course, you're in the heat of the moment. You just want a big game. You want on the road. You want at the place that, is in question. And it's just very, I think it's very clear that he at least wants to, I almost don't want to say I feel like if Dusty May was offered the job, he would take it, right? Maybe I'm completely out of place from saying that or with saying that. I think Dusty May would have a hard time turning down the job at his alma mater, even if he is happy where he's at right now, just because I would say, how many more opportunities will you be given that chance, especially if Indiana finds the right guy this time around? I think there can be more than one right guy. I'm not trying to say there's just one person that will definitively change the program. But maybe, Dusty May could see this as like, okay, if I don't jump at this now, there's a chance that I may not get to do this again at the place where I, grew up playing, or not playing, but, being a manager on the sidelines, and kind of cutting his teeth and eventually becoming a head coach, that sort of thing. And so I think his response is very kind of telling. Maybe I'm not the only person, or maybe I'm the only person who sees it the way that it is, but I don't think so. But again, I do want to reiterate, Dusty May, especially with the fact that Indiana just went the route of hiring an alum and the different pressures that come with that, I don't think this would necessarily be the best hire. Again, maybe I'll eat those words down the line. But I think there's plenty. I think there's other options that you would want first if you were given the chance to take somebody else before you get to a Dusty May. Because let's go ahead, and I've talked about Dusty May's kind of credentials, if you will, on this show before. I think, if not on this show, on a different show. But if you look at his overall body of work as a head coach, outside of his Final Four run, he's not done anything of significance. He had his first 3 seasons, even actually every season at Florida Atlantic minus his last 2, were at best mediocre. And actually, let's even compare it to this. His first 4 seasons at Florida Atlantic were on par I don't think on par. They're worse than what Mike Woodson's done in any season with Indiana. 17-16, 17-15, 13-10, 19-15. And then things finally came together. After that, they went 35-4 and made the Final Four. And then after that, they went 25-9 and got beat by, if I remember right, Northwestern last year in the round of 64. Now, he's at a power program now with Michigan, of course. Currently 18-5, 10-2 in the Big Ten. And, we're yet to see how the rest of the season will play out and where they'll end up finishing. Of course, now with the added noise of whether or not he'll be the next head coach at Indiana. So we'll see how he deals with said noise and whether or not that will affect his postseason performance or the rest of his regular season. But I'll say this: if Michigan's, if the rest of their season kind of begins to reflect this narrative and they kind of take a drop off, I'm a hard no on Dusty May if things play out that way, because there's enough evidence on, from his previous several seasons minus his Final Four run that you could almost say that it was a fluke Final Four. Now, not every aspect of getting to the Final Four means like it was fluky. Like, they were a good team that year. And it was also during, I think you had the transfer portal. You did have the transfer portal, but it wasn't, he wasn't bringing in the guys off the bat the way that, power programs do whenever he put together his Final Four run. So I do think he did it a little more organically as opposed to, bringing in guys like he did right now in his first year at Michigan. And then in the following year, a lot of those guys stuck around and they weren't able to replicate that sort of success. Now, they weren't bad, but they dropped off by 10 wins and they bowed out in the first round of the tournament to a Big Ten team that maybe I should remind you of this, that Mike Woodson hasn't beaten either. Mike Woodson and Dusty May haven't. Well, I don't know if I should look and see what Michigan's done against Northwestern this year because, Indiana, of course, as we all know, it's the one team in the Big Ten that Mike Woodson has not at least beaten once during his 4 seasons. Now, I'm not including the Pac-12 teams, of course, but Dusty May is a risk. It's not only the risk of what I'm laying out in front of you right now, but it's the risk of the alumni pressure again. People like you kind of risk but tarnishing your reputation of how people look at you if you don't, live up to expectations. I mean, the amount of nasty things and experiences that Mike Woodson's had to deal with, especially these last 2 seasons, like, this guy was revered as a player before he became the head coach at Indiana. And now I think people still respect him. And after he's gone for a few years, they'll be happy with what he did in the first couple of seasons. But people will always remember what happened, not just this year, but the previous season that kind of kicked all of this off. So, and I don't know if Dusty May can clearly see what's happening here, and he knows the same amount of pressure, if not more, will be put on him than Mike Woodson. And we already saw how he turned down the Louisville job for Michigan instead. And maybe it's because he would rather wait for Indiana for the big high-pressure job. It would have been tougher to leave Louisville for Indiana. I don't know, because he's always going to be second fiddle at Michigan to Michigan football. So that's kind of my thoughts on Dusty May, and that's why I wanted to start with him, because I'm pretty sure even if he's not most people's first pick, and I don't believe he is. Maybe I'm off base with that too. He's still the name that tends to come up the most when people think like, oh, is Indiana going to go after Dusty May? I don't know. And it just annoys me for whatever reason. Maybe I'm just kind of in an annoyed mood today when it comes to some of the stuff that's going on in the wonderful world of sports. All right, but let's move on to some more candidates. And I guess we'll go ahead and start with this next one. And it's somebody who he's not at the top of my list, but it's the person that I named on Friday that I think if he was given the opportunity, he'd crawl here. And I think he would do very well. Now, this person does not come without baggage, and I don't need to tease it any more than I did on Friday. And that's, of course, Chris Beard, currently with Ole Miss, previously with Texas Tech, Little Rock, And then before that, Angelo State and McMurray. Didn't know about those two, but that's here on his head coaching record as well. If he does not have the baggage that he comes with, which is, of course, the allegations that were given to him that ultimately caused his firing at Texas before those domestic violence charges were dropped. Without that, I think he's near the very top of every list. But because of the baggage, I almost think that he'd probably be the most divisive candidate, and understandably so. And I don't want people to think that because I think Chris Beard would be a good head coach at Indiana, I don't want people to think that I'm okay with Indiana hiring somebody who would allegedly beat up their wife or somebody else, whatever it may be. Because let me put it this way, if he had done that and it was proven, absolutely not. He probably wouldn't even be coaching right now at Ole Miss. But because those charges were dropped, and he still, at least in the college basketball realm of things, he has a good reputation on the court, I should say. I believe he's still with his wife, though, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know where all that stuff came from. Maybe we'll do it. I'm sure if he ends up becoming the head coach or a very serious candidate to take the job, then I'm sure there'll be people will dive back into that realm of things. And I think that's the other part of this that makes this difficult, is that if you're Indiana and you hire Chris Beard and then something like that comes out again, you look like a fool if you're Scott Dolson, right? And that may even be your undoing if you're the athletic director at Indiana, no matter how good Kurt Cignetti's doing. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it's Chris Beard's an interesting one, because I think if you eliminate, and I know you can't, but if you eliminate the off the court stuff, I think Chris Beard is probably one of the best guys that could take the job at Indiana, because he would want it. And I think his style it would appeal to a lot of different sets of fans, I'll say. And plus his just kind of personality really just kind of fits Indiana, I think. But who knows? Let's just take a look at some of his results, by the way. And we could look at McMurray and Angelo State. I'm not really going to look at those. He did perform well in his 3 seasons at both of those schools. Beginning with Little Rock, 1 season there, 30-5. I believe that was the year they upset Purdue as well in the NCAA tournament. They lost in the round of 32. But again, it's Little Rock. They're not expected to do much in the NCAA tournament. And then Texas Tech. He had 5 good seasons there, 4 of them that were really good. And, of course, one of those being topped off with being the national runner-up in 2019. And then before that, making the Elite Eight. Already two examples of places Indiana has not been in quite some time. And then in Texas, 2 seasons. First season, 22-12, replacing Shaka Smart, went to the round of 32. And then before he was fired, he was 7-1 in the 22-23 season. And then at Ole Miss, 20-12 in his first year, currently 18-6. Looks like he could be on his way to topping his first season with Ole Miss. And so there's not a lot of bad. In the years that were not so good, I guess, he was 18-11 at Tech one year, 18-13 in the COVID season, or the season that got canceled because of COVID, the final, the postseason, I should say. And then his first season at Texas Tech, 18-14. So not a lot of bad seasons, a couple of mediocre seasons, but more often than not, and especially in the latter part of his career so far, Chris Beard shows that he can consistently be near the top, not only his conference, but at least when it comes to expectations relative to their school, he usually gets the job done. Now, Ole Miss, always going to be a difficult place to do well at in the SEC, and even more so this year. And so far, he's taking the competitive nature of the SEC and doing quite well with it, being 7-4 in the conference. So we'll see where they end up being. If I were guessing, I would probably say Chris Beard doesn't end up at Indiana, just because of, there'd be a lot of questions that both Scott Dolson and Chris Beard would need to answer, about his past, that I think Indiana in particular would not really want to have hanging over their head. And it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of where we're at. When people do things that they shouldn't do or don't do, because again, it's all alleged and evidently proven to have not happened. At least charges were dropped. Doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't happen. But either way, it does make it a more divisive hire, and therefore, I don't think this will be the one Indiana goes. At this point in time, I really don't know. That's why we're hoping to have a couple of different guests on this week that can kind of help us think which direction Indiana may focus on as the season continues to, not the season, as the search moves forward down the line. Next one, actually, let's take a drink of coffee real quick before I don't want to run out of breath again and then end up having to recount my thoughts. So a quick pause for a nice little coffee break real quick. And if you're like me, take a sip of your coffee and we can be on the same page together. And let's see how much time, by the way. It doesn't matter. This is a solo episode. I have a lot more breathing room to go long if I do end up rambling a little bit. So I'm going to go 3 more coaches. And this next one is somebody who this is who I think would unify the fan base the most outside of he who shall not be named. But the name out of guys who seem to be in that realistic-ish tier that I think fans would be the most excited about from all shapes and sizes, whatever it may be, is Bruce Pearl. Currently with Auburn, of course, has them on top of the top 25 right now, I believe. Could be on their way to a national championship potentially. And also somebody who has expressed his love for Indiana and also destroyed Indiana last year in the non-conference. And he's also somebody who's won everywhere he's been. He's never won the big one, at least at the Division I level, but he's had his fair share of success, especially when he was at Southern Indiana. Never won less than 22 games, and that was in his first season. He went to the Division II national championship 2 times in a row, won it the second time he was there, and then beginning in the year 2001, went to Milwaukee, was only there for a short time, ended up taking them to the Sweet 16. This is the Horizon League, by the way, Milwaukee team. Went on to coach at Tennessee before. And I forget a little bit about the NCAA investigation that took place, and I believe it ended up leading to his firing at Tennessee. If I remember right, and if someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was similar to the level of issues that like Kelvin Sampson had with Indiana when he was let go, that type of stuff. If I'm completely throwing that out of left field and that's completely wrong, feel free to correct me. But I feel like that's why he ended up having some issues with Tennessee in his latter years. But had some good times there. Ended up making the Sweet 16 twice and the Elite 8 once, and then at Auburn, kind of a rough start. But again, this is back when you had to rebuild your team from scratch more so, or more often than not, and take some time to really get your guys in, as they say. Went 15-20, 11-20, and then 6-14 in 2017. But then from that point forward, sorry, some of the stuff I'm looking at, and I feel like I'm learning about it as I'm reading it. But since 2017-18, he's had some really good seasons: 26-8, 30-10, 25-6, 26-6, 27-8 last year, and even some mid seasons. Since 2017-18, he's never had a game. He's had one season, I should say, where he's won less than 21 games, and that was in the 2021 campaign, which of course was the first year after the COVID cancellation. And of course, right now he's got his team on top of the world, 21-1. Currently the heavy favorites to win the most difficult SEC conference there has ever been. And of course, with that, favored to likely win the entire thing. Now, will they do that? Easier said than done. And if he does do that, will he even care to jump jobs and start over at Indiana? Now, starting over isn't what it used to be, like whenever he took over at Auburn back in 14-15. But you're going to be made king in Auburn if you and maybe you already have been made king, but even more so if you get to the Final Four and potentially win a national championship. And so I guess speaking of that, he's only made the Final Four once. That does kind of need to be said, I guess, especially if we're going back compared to Chris Beard. Chris Beard's had some better postseason finishes than Mr. Bruce Pearl, at least in the Division I level. But again, baggage. Bruce Pearl's baggage is not nearly what Chris Beard's baggage would be if he comes to Indiana. But I think, at least when at the current state of college basketball, Bruce Pearl is the guy who would get Indiana fans the most fired up. Also, along the same lines as Chris Beard, this guy's very fiery and would get the fan base super excited. And I think he's somebody that would, if Indiana can get him, would really get potentially get things rolling from day one. And same with Chris Beard. And Dusty May could do the same too. I don't want to leave him out. He's just somebody that I feel like comes with a little more risk on the coaching side of things, not off the court. Dusty May's the last guy who I believe would have some off the court issues between most of these guys. And then we'll get into a couple of others. People have thrown out Scott Drew. And I feel like every big time job that opens up names Scott Drew. And I don't think he's somebody, I mean, he's one of the most consistent guys, I should say. Not necessarily when it comes to the postseason finishes. I mean, he's only had between his how many seasons since 2003 at Baylor, he's had what looks to be 3 seasons that where he finished at the Elite Eight or better. And of course, one of those being the national championship in 2021. But since then, there's been kind of a drop off, and it's kind of been a slow drop off. And nothing too substantial. 27 wins in 22, 23 wins in 23, and then 24 wins in 24. And all those finishes were in the round of 32. Nothing super extravagant in the postseason, but consistent in the regular season nonetheless. And then right now they're sitting at 15-8, 7-5 in the Big 12. And of course, the Big 12 has been a difficult conference to do well in the last several seasons, if you remember. But Scott Drew, somebody who's been very tough to pry away from Baylor. And I guess if you can, then I'm sure the biggest argument for Scott Drew at Indiana is that if he can build this consistent juggernaut-like program with Baylor, I don't want to call them a complete juggernaut. They just, their one championship came during the COVID season. The COVID season that did happen, I should say. And outside of that, again, not the 2 Elite Eights back in 2010 and then 2012. And I don't know, for some reason, I feel like I give Scott Drew enough credit. Something tells me there would be something underwhelming about it, but maybe it's one of the more consistent guys you could have roaming your sidelines. One thing to keep in mind, though, with Scott Drew, though, never mind, he's 54. I thought he was 60 something. I don't know why I thought he was in his 60s. That's silly on me. There's a coach out there. Maybe it's Bruce Pearl, actually. Now that I think about it, I feel like I need to fact check myself. Yeah, never mind. Bruce Pearl's the old one. Bruce Pearl's 64. He'd be right up there with Curt Cignetti when it comes to years left likely in the coaching game. So yeah, scratch that on Scott Drew. But he's somebody who, of course, is very loyal to Baylor. And also the fact that, Baylor's a private school. He takes his faith very seriously, which I don't have an issue with that whatsoever. But I don't know that he, maybe he wants a change. People like to throw that out all the time. Like, oh, he's been at Baylor for so long. Maybe he wants a change. And that could be true. But he also may just, like, his home may be Baylor. A lot of people thought he would have left his cozy position to go be the head coach at Kentucky. And that ended up not being the case. He didn't leave the job for Louisville. So I don't really know. But because of those two things, why would he leave for Indiana? I don't necessarily think that he would. But you never know. Crazier things have happened, right? So, yeah, I don't know if I did the best job explaining my thoughts on Scott Drew. He's not somebody I think about nearly as much or nearly as often as the others so far. And then the last one is kind of a random one that I've heard a few people throw out, not even just for the Indiana job. This guy's name was thrown around a lot when it came to the Louisville job last year, and it's Ben McCollum. Are you familiar with one Ben McCollum, who is currently the head coach at Drake? This is a guy, he kind of he kind of fits the Curt Cignetti mold. And not that he's old. This guy's 43 years old, but he's taken the route so far, at least, where he's built up really good teams at lower levels. And with Northwest Missouri State for 15 years, this guy won. I think I've known this, but I don't think I've ever seen it right in front of my face the way that I am right now. This guy won 4 Division II national championships. The first one being in 2017, then again in 19, then won back-to-back in 21 and 22, and had very consistent seasons in every year. Basically all but his first 2 seasons, he had a really good record. Kind of similar like Curt Cignetti. Now, Curt Cignetti has never had a losing record. Ben McCollum had 2 in his first 2 seasons as a head coach. And right now he's at Drake in the Missouri Valley, has him at 21 and 2. So that's somebody that could be your wild card. And it'd be very weird to see if it would, if Indiana would take a chance on somebody like that, especially because this guy's on the younger side. And if he has success in Indiana, he could be around for a very long time. However, it's also worth mentioning, this guy is from Iowa City, and I do think Iowa fans are, kind of getting some Fran McCaffrey fatigue. They've had some good teams over the last several years that haven't really done much with in the postseason. And so I don't know if this guy's not an Iowa alum, but maybe he grew up an Iowa fan potentially. I'm just kind of speaking out of my rear end right now. But maybe he would be the favorite to take the Iowa job down the road if that opened up for some reason. But who knows? Maybe Indiana will be facing Ben McCollum in the next couple of years, or maybe he'll be the head coach at Indiana. Who knows? But that's kind of the wild card name I wanted to throw out there right now, and kind of one that fits the Cignetti-ish mold as somebody that hasn't really proven it at the top level, but at lower levels he was the king for a while, at least at the Division II level. So those are the 5 guys, at least some of the 5 guys, my 5 guys, burgers and fries, that I think that I think will be named and talked about over the next several weeks. I mean, and this could be a very long coaching search. We got to think about that too. This is the fact that it's a retirement. Like, this Indiana basketball season is a wash, right? Like, yeah, maybe they win some games, but there's nothing really to take into the off season. Like, this is a dead end. Like, if Indiana gets in the tournament, wins a game, hoorah. I guess this goes back to one of the YouTube comments we got a couple of weeks ago that says this is just the way you could hope things could work out. Indiana has a good, strong end of the season, and Mike Woodson happily retires. And I don't know if he'll happily retire based on how the season's going right now, but we'll have to just wait and see how things play out over the next few weeks. So I don't know. I've done enough talking. Very long episode to do by myself. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully in some way, shape, or form. I hope to have on, as I've mentioned a few times now, a couple of different guests on this week to kind of dive deeper into this upcoming head coaching search that Indiana will go through. And it'll be a long, potentially bumpy-ish ride with some twists and turns along the way. I'm sure there'll be times where Indiana thinks they have their guy and they don't, or people think they know who it's going to be and it just ends up not working out. Well, it'll be interesting to see. But these are my parting words. Don't be that guy or gal that just screams into the ether, "He who shall not be named." And I'm not talking about Lord Voldemort. You know who I'm talking about if you watched the earlier portion of this episode. Don't be that guy who assumes that he who shall not be named is going to come crawling to Bloomington like it's the job he's always wanted, because it's not. He who shall not be named is happy where he is right now. And I'll gladly eat those words if I'm wrong, but I think we all should ignore the urge to scream out this particular person's name unless we have real reason to believe so. So until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.